thank you all so much for joining us today. We are in for quite the treat here. We are here to talk a little bit more about Tensor and kind of the marketplace platform they got going on Solana. So without further ado, got someone from the team here. Would love for you to introduce yourself. Just tell us a little bit about you, how you kind of came into this project and got affiliated with it, and then also maybe just give us a quick 1 minute elevator pitch, so to speak, on what exactly it is we're talking about today.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me again. So I guess personally, I sort of came from a mixture of finance and tech. And the other thing I did a lot of when I was a kid was gaming. And so you can imagine how I ended up in NFTs, because basically like all three together. And then initially, so my co-founder, he was also in finance. We sort of like shared this interest in this like new and emerging asset class called NFTs. And when most people saw like this silly little industry with PFPs that probably is going to go to zero, we actually saw the beginning of something very, very big. And often in technology, the most exciting things start out looking like a toy. And that's kind of what we saw. And so we decided that we wanted to build something cool in this industry. The first product we built was an oracle for NFT pricing. And we tried selling that for maybe 3-4 months and just discovered that the market wasn't big enough. There weren't enough buyers for that. So then we sort of pivoted into Tensor as it is today, which is the trading platform. Our thesis at the time was very simple. We basically thought that NFTs, like this is probably about 1.5 years ago. And just to like give some context, this is when most marketplaces, in order for you to see new listings come in, you had to hit the refresh button. So that was the state of things. And for us, we thought, coming kind of from like trading backgrounds, we thought, okay, this is crazy. This is not how traditional trading works and not how software in that world works. And we thought that NFTs over time would move a lot closer to that world, because at the end of the day, they were just assets with a price. And so we imagined this pro platform where you would go on a website, it would be real time, you would auto refresh, it would have a chart, it would have an order book, it would have a bunch of analytics. And like at the time, nobody really built that. And so we decided to work on it. And the other, I guess, important decision that we made at the time was to go with Solana. And that was because we felt that for the kind of trading that we got excited about, like the fast-paced trading, you kind of needed a really fast and cheap blockchain. And so we felt that we would basically have, like in the long term, we would have better product market fit on Solana. And yeah, I guess a year later, we built Tensor. It's now the leading marketplace on Solana. We're the first one by volume. And we are currently wrapping up season 2 of our rewards.
That's awesome. Because, I mean, it's so interesting. And don't get me wrong, I now will admit I am not a huge Solana maxi. I don't participate on the blockchain like a lot of people do or have. So, but like if you would have asked me what the number one marketplace on Solana would have been, I would have told you Magic Eden. And I think a lot of people in the same token would say the same about OpenSea on ETH, right? So it's interesting to see maybe maybe not new, but a newer marketplace take over, kind of that staple marketplace. So maybe tell us a little bit about how that happened, maybe the strategy and the come up there, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I could come up with like a really nice story about how we planned it all out to the T and executed perfectly, but that would be totally wrong. And I'd be coming up with stuff. The reality is things like these are very path dependent, where you as a founder, you just kind of have to play ball with the market you're in and just try and make the best decisions in the moment. I think the biggest, this is like a little aside, but like, I guess the biggest learning for me as a founder was that it's never about having the best plan or even making the best decisions. It's about making the best possible decisions in the limited time that you have, because you have to move like at the speed of light to survive as a seed stage startup. So we just made like a bunch of right decisions along the way. So specifically, what did we do? Well, first of all, we built a product that was different. And I think that's really important. For example, when OpenSea tried going to Solana, even though they were a known brand and they had distribution, they showed up with a product that was literally no different to Magic Eden. And so nobody cared. What we built was, if you guys ever like find screenshots of our first product, it was literally like a terminal for the nerds. It looked more like Bloomberg than a marketplace. And that was a good thing because that gave certain people that needed a different product a reason to use it. And then obviously over time, like as we broadened our user base and currently we're serving both what we would consider more advanced traders and kind of more normie traders, of course the product became more friendly. You know, the corners are more rounded. It doesn't look as scary anymore. There's like a light mode, just like a lot of features that make it more friendly. But that's kind of where we started. So that was the first decision. The next decision was to grow our initial user base by going door to door, literally like trader to trader that we knew on Solana, and just asking them like, hey, if we gave you a product like this, would you use it? And if they said no, we would ask, okay, why? Well, what change would you need for you to use it? And it took maybe like the first 50, 100, 200 people that we convinced literally like one by one to use the product to kind of get the ball rolling. And then once we had that initial user base, what started happening was because people were genuinely enjoying the product, they started sharing it with other people. And we kind of started growing from there. And then probably the third thing that we did that was pretty important was focus on rewards. Like, honestly, Richard and me were both product guys. And for us initially, it kind of felt backwards thinking about rewards rather than thinking about product, because we kind of came from this like Paul Graham school of thinking where it's like product market fit before everything. And like you have to figure out, what is it that users actually want rather than try and like use paid marketing to force them to use it. But the reality is in Web3, it's a little different because a lot of people in Web3, they sort of use different products because they provide different incentives. And I think the best products, what they do is they bake incentives into the product experience. And to me, that's like really where the line is between the kind of 1% of really good products and the 99% of everybody else. I'd like to give you an example. Right now, we're basically doing our mint, Tensorians, and the mint experience, the way the pages people interact with, the like everything they have to do to get the NFT, and then the things they're going to be able to do with the NFT, it's all woven into the product. So you're on Tensor, it's our branding, it's our style, it feels at home, it feels like it's something that we built. And we're very proud of that because we think that that is what gets users fired up. But like, yeah, I guess like those are kind of the three things that we did that probably got us to where we are.
Got it. I love to hear that. And not only that, but in I don't want to get off too on a tangent or pump you up too much, but I love listening to founders who, when they speak, they have their thoughts organized, even when I ask a question maybe they didn't expect or didn't know. And just the way you're pacing and the way that you're answering these questions makes me feel like you're not blowing steam up us, that you believe and know what you're saying. So I always really appreciate that because you wouldn't believe the times where that's not the case. So thank you for that. So I guess, obviously, you mentioned the reasons why you like Solana and the reasons why you guys started on Solana. Maybe kind of let's take a step back. What, like, I feel like as a NFT veteran, it feels like a lot of battles were fought on Solana. And, the last time I checked in, it didn't seem like the tides were on the winning side there anymore. It felt like we kind of like almost at one point like it was lost cause. So maybe kind of bring us back if we've strayed too far off from not trusting Solana, and maybe bring us back to why we should be coming back and not only using your marketplace but using the Solana chain in general.
Yeah, so I actually think that's a really good question, and I'm actually more excited these days to speak on ETH spaces than I am to speak on Sol spaces. Because like, what am I going to tell my Sol dudes? They already know me. They already know everything I'm going to tell them. It's not exciting. But it's kind of actually pretty exciting to talk to somebody outside the ecosystem and maybe share a little bit about what we think is kind of cool about the things we're building. And so to jump straight into it, what excites us about Solana are actually not use cases that compete with Ethereum. just the same way that, Ethereum didn't win users by saying we're going to be a better Bitcoin. Solana is not going to win users by saying we're going to be a better Ethereum. There's like zero chance of us winning that fight. Solana, on the other hand, might win use cases where Ethereum simply isn't architected to compete. For example, one of those use cases is what we call compressed NFTs. And compressed NFTs is this kind of new NFT standard on Solana with one very important property. They're so freaking cheap that they're almost free. Specifically, you can mint 1 billion of these things for $10,000. And it just so happens in technology that when you can bring the cost of something down by a magnitude, what you typically do is you create a new market, because people who were restricted from using this tech can now do it. This is what Uber did to rides. This is what DoorDash did to food delivery. And this is what we think something like compressed NFTs could do to the NFT market. And the sort of early innings that we're seeing of that are in the new distribution models that creators are discovering. For example, there's a project on Solana called Drip. And Drip is this interesting project where on one hand, they have creators that come to Drip and they do free art drops, completely free, to their subscribers. And then on the other hand, they have hundreds of thousands of subscribers that come and subscribe to these art drops. And so you could almost think of it as a newsletter, that goes from a creator to 100,000 subscribers, 200,000 subscribers every single week, except it's not a newsletter, it's a bunch of NFTs. And the reason that business model is sustainable in Solana is because it costs them $10 to do it. Right? You couldn't afford that anywhere else, especially if you're hoping that this number is eventually going to scale into millions and hopefully even billions of consumers. So that's what gets us fired up about Solana, these use cases where you really need the cost to be near zero, and you need to have these transactions to be super fast. And that's basically what compressed NFTs are and why we're excited about them.
Understood. And again, correct my small brain if I'm wrong about this, but if Solana has been around for as long as ETH has been around and had as much volume as ETH had, would the problems that ETH has with gas fees and things like that still remain on Solana, or is it just Solana has a different way of doing it?
In short, Solana has a different way of doing it. This is not to say that Solana will scale infinitely at once. If there's enough users, it'll also run into problems. But the threshold for Solana is a lot higher than for ETH because of the architecture. And maybe to give you guys a glimpse, basically the biggest decision that Solana made, that Ethereum did it, was to parallelize its runtime. And for anybody who's not a developer, that simply means that instead of having a single lane on a road where all the cars have to go one after another, you have 10, 20, 30, 1,000 lanes in parallel. And so, of course, you can have 10, 20, 1,000 times more traffic going through it. And that's a very common pattern in computing and in technology, where your CPU, your processor, for example, it doesn't just do everything on one lane. It has many different lanes. Your GPU has even more lanes. And everything in programming these days is basically parallelized. So that's kind of what Solana did. Of course, that comes with trade-offs. The main trade-off that many of you probably know is that in order for you to run a validator client for Solana, you basically need a much more powerful machine. And so you could make the argument that the trade-off Solana made here is, yes, it's more powerful, it's faster, but it's less decentralized because it's harder for an average person like you and me to run a node from our home laptop.
Understood. Okay. And thank you. I realize that's not quite what we're here for today, but I do think it is important to, reestablish Solana in a lot of people's minds, because, again, I don't think a lot of people have thought about it since, after the whole FTX crash and probably beyond. So thank you for kind of giving us a little bit more background and kind of just a quick refresher on Solana there. But let's get back into the platform, I guess. So obviously you guys are doing things a little bit different. What other things can we see from the platform here coming in the future that you guys are excited about specifically?
Yeah, actually, maybe I can talk very quickly about some of the things we already built and kind of how they're different to some of the other marketplaces?
That'd be great.
So Tensor is really a product built around speed. Speed and everything, speed in how fast we ingest data, speed in how quickly we display stuff on the screen, speed in how quickly you can create a bunch of transactions, 200, 300 transactions, and speed at which those transactions confirm. And we've basically spent stupid amount of time optimizing every little part of that journey, which is why if you go and use Tensor for the first time, what we often hear from users that are less familiar with Solana is that it almost feels like a centralized exchange because everything is just so fast. So with that in mind, I think what's interesting when we look at some of the patterns of how people use Tensor today is they tend to trade strategies that require more volume, that require more transactions, and that normally people wouldn't do on other marketplaces in Solana, and especially on marketplaces on ETH. So for example, you guys probably know SudoSwap. It's an AMM on Ethereum. It sort of was pretty popular at one point, but it never really gained traction. And that's because it's just expensive. You can't do a lot of transactions on Ethereum when every transaction costs $5. But on Solana, where every transaction costs less than a penny, what people do on Tensor, and over 70% of our volume is AMM, what people do on Tensor is they'll create a pool and they'll change it 17 times in 10 minutes, and then they'll have 25 transactions hitting that pool every hour. And it's you aggregate 100 of those people, and that's a lot of transactions and a lot of pools. And so that's kind of what we're seeing with a product like Tensor. And again, why we think that the runtime we chose for it is really, really important. The other thing I will share is, so I mentioned compressed NFTs. We basically built the first ever marketplace for compressed NFTs. And it's been live for just under 2 months. And we've seen about 1 million transactions that happened on it. I mean, that is crazy. That is more transactions. And that's about 50 or 100,000 wallets that interacted with it. That is more transactions than our normal marketplace for the entire year. So that just gives you an idea of some of these new primitives and business models that Solana is unlocking, why we're so excited about it. Okay, so I guess that's kind of what we built today. I think your question was kind of what we're thinking next.
Yes, if you are thinking of something next, which I have a funny feeling that you are.
Yeah, just a couple things. I mean, for us, honestly, it's leading more into these things that there's this meme right now on Solana and Twitter. It's only possible on Solana. And it sounds silly, but it's it makes sense. It makes sense to lean into that because, again, that is what's going to make or break Solana and hopefully make it successful. And so for us, we're leaning very heavily to compressed NFTs. We're building an entire ecosystem of products out that is going to help creators create assets and distribute those assets. Traders consume those assets, trade those assets, speculate on those assets. And then even something for retail users that don't trade that is going to make it really fun to collect those assets. So that's broadly what we're thinking right now.
Awesome. Okay. That is neat. I love that again. And I love, the volume metrics there too. That's quite impressive. So, we talked a little bit about what you guys have done in the past and currently what you guys are doing here in the future. Maybe not to hark too much back on Solana, but what do you feel in terms of projects, in terms of things that are really changing the game of NFTs? Because I feel right now in NFTs, we're kind of in a slump. I don't feel like there are a ton of innovative projects or movement, at least optics-wise, that NFTs are currently, changing the game on. I feel right now, especially outside looking in, that NFTs are a failed project. Overall, NFTs are failed. To the media, to my mom, to my wife, to a lot of people, they feel they had their the beanie, they had their time to shine, and it just fell. Obviously, that's not the case, right? I know that there are projects that are building, and there are projects that are still working with the technology, and they're still innovating. But specifically, when we talk about Solana, can you maybe outline a few projects that maybe would get someone excited to want to come and trade on Solana? I realize you guys are a platform, a selling platform. But in my mind, for me to want to come on Solana and buy something, and you all use y'all's platform, I need that, I need that rush. I need that kind of project that gets you excited. So curious if you could maybe give us a little bit of insight on things that maybe you're excited about.
Yeah, for sure. So I think actually what you said is interesting, right? Like NFTs have failed. That's probably the impression that most of the world has about our industry right now. It's probably not the impression that many of us from the inside have. I think we're seeing, it's just crazy how like you still have, like Tensor has 25,000 daily active users. Just think about that. 25,000 people around the world that show up to our product daily at a point where everything bad that could have happened to Solana did happen. Like all the bad narratives have literally manifested itself. FTX, chain halting, like you name it. Price fell to $8 and there's still 25,000 guys showing up. Like to me, that's a sign of strength, because if those 25,000 people are showing up in bad times like this, then I think when narrative recovers and people kind of realize that some of the fundamentals are still there, then I could easily see that number 10xing and maybe more. But yeah, that's on the side. So I guess for projects specifically, I think, okay, well, I'm going to start with my PFP, which is a Mad Lad. I think to me, Mad Lad is probably the most exciting project on Solana right now. For anybody who doesn't know, it's a project that was started by two founders, Armani and Tristan. They are the team that built a lot of really important technical primitives on Solana, including something called Anchor. If you're a developer, you maybe heard of that. Something called Serum Exchange. If you're in DeFi, you maybe heard of that. Like just all around really, really talented guys. And their latest product is this thing called Backpack, which is a wallet with a runtime, is how I would describe it. And if you're not a developer, all it means is that unlike in other wallets, where they act really as kind of like windows into the world of blockchain, Backpack is more like a window, but with a room, where like certain things can happen in that room and developers can write code that runs directly into the wallet. And more so, that code can be transferred itself with an NFT. So the NFT doesn't represent a picture, it represents a piece of code. And that's like a very unique, differentiated idea that has like a lot of really interesting consequences that can be explored. And that's kind of why I'm like really excited for this project, really excited for that team. And aside of that, they just built like a really cool NFT project, cool art. People like anime. I mean, I like it. So yeah, I guess that's one. Another one that I'll highlight is a project called Heist. So Heist is basically this game built on Solana. And what's cool about Heist is it's also leaning into some of the things that are kind of only possible on Solana. It's basically a game with a bunch of game theory where you're like collecting stuff, trying to rob a bank, then like doing other stuff. And all of it is on-chain interactions. As you're performing those interactions, then your NFT morphs and changes. And so you can basically upgrade, downgrade your NFT. You can lose it, you can gain it. And so there's like a lot of really interesting stuff that those guys do. And again, like what excites me about them is they're leaning very heavily into kind of this cheapness and speed property of Solana. So yeah, I guess those are. Oh, and of course, I would be remiss not to mention the most important project, which is our own. So Tensorians. So I think for us, what's exciting about Tensorians is we kind of conceived of this project about a year ago because we noticed one very important thing. We noticed that besides like NFT communities have a lot of problems. They do a lot of things wrong. But the really successful ones do one thing right. And that is they build this feeling of loyalty and allegiance among their members, which is completely unmatched by anything we've seen in Web 2 or Web 3. Like you're literally building a cult. There's no better way to put it. These are people who will do anything and everything for you because you basically become your project, this NFT has become part of their identity. And so for us, when we conceived of this project a year ago, we thought, okay, well, yeah, we can build a cool marketplace, but really like it's not that hard to build a copy. you can even attract liquidity, but to be honest, with incentives, you can kind of attract it away, and somebody, the next guy who comes around could do it. But if we build a brand, a cult, a dedicated following of people for whom Tensor is way more than just the marketplace, man, those people are going to be hard to take away. And so that was the motivation for their project. And so when we're thinking about Tensorians and we're thinking about what are they going to be for Tensor, we're thinking very deeply about how do we make it an integral part of the product? How do we make somebody owning a Tensorian really feel special when they show up to Tensor, which they hopefully already find pleasant to use? So yeah, that's the rundown, I guess.
That's awesome. Okay, that you're speaking about these things, and it's kind of giving me a little excited. My ears are kind of perking up a little bit. So thank you. So I can't tell you the history of marketplaces on Solana as we've discussed, but I can tell you the history of marketplaces on Ethereum, and we've obviously within the past 8 months now, 8 months have gone through a pretty large change where we've seen more retail forward marketplaces kind of go on the downtrend. Obviously, OpenSea came into place, and then Looks Rare kind of started showing them up a little bit, and then out of nowhere, Blur came out of the pocket and kind of changed the way we do selling and buying. Right, it kind of changed the marketplace, so to speak. A lot of people think to the detriment. Could you maybe give us a little bit of insight on how your all's platform is changing things, or are we seeing maybe a trend towards kind of how Blur has kind of taken over with more like a quick transaction, floors, things like that? Can you maybe give us a little insight? Maybe even your thoughts on Blur, A, on the Ethereum chain, and then B, whether or not you would compare yourselves to them.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to be said about Blur. First of all, a part of me wonders how much of this downturn is actually caused by Blur versus it's caused by the fact that we're in probably the worst macro environment we've ever been in the last, 20 years. And people have lost a lot of money, and there's not a lot of good vibes left in these communities. Like, you can't blame everything on Blur, right? Like, projects whose prices are constantly going down, are they really constantly going down because there's a bunch of traders, or are they going down because, well, frankly, they're not shipping anything interesting and nobody cares? So I don't know, maybe that's a contrarian take, but I'm not entirely sold on the idea that Blur is causing all of this downtrend. That's the first thing. The second thing I will say is people forget how exciting Blur was just 6 months ago. And Blur was exciting because unlike some of the bigger marketplaces that have a more Web2-esque model, Blur actually brought something new to the table. They tried new things that nobody tried before, and they innovated. And sometimes innovation is a risk, and you try things and sometimes they don't work out, and sometimes they do work out. But I think one thing is certain, those guys are great builders. They're very creative, and they're not afraid to try things. And for a new market like NFTs, I don't see how that's a bad thing. So I guess that's my take on Blur. I think for Tensor in particular, do we take a bunch of inspiration from Blur? Yes. Did we learn from Blur's mistakes and do things differently? Also, yes. Are we going to change things going forward? Also, yes. And that's because we see ourselves kind of like Blur, a small, nimble team that is constantly thinking on its feet and is not afraid to try things, even if they're risky. So to get specific here for rewards, we have ran 2 seasons so far. First season has been something totally different, completely not related to whatever Blur was doing. Season 2 was kind of similar to Blur. We had a similar formula for incentivizing maker liquidity close to the floor. And then most of the season, we were able to contain the sort of people trying to game it. But then near the end, we saw that it's becoming harder and harder. And that's why we sort of wrapped it up a little bit faster than we originally thought we would. And why for season 3, we're thinking of something else. because we basically don't want to incentivize this behavior. Like ultimately, toxicity is not good for anybody. And if people are only listing to make points, then that's probably not healthy for the market. So I think this is just a long way of saying that I don't think the world is as black and white as people make it out to be. And designing a good incentives program is very, very hard and takes a lot of iteration. I think both Blur and us are kind of on that journey right now.
I think you have a point there. And Mevik, I think your thought there is very similar to mine as well. Again, people like to blame the easy out there. And I mean, you know, it happens in the stock market and in the everything. So, you know, I see that there. So I'm kind of curious on, you know, the platform and maybe something that we haven't brushed on anymore. I want to make sure that I do justice to you guys and make sure that we highlight anything that's coming up or anything specific that you're excited that you wanted to share with us. As we're kind of coming to the end here of the conversation, wanted to make sure we end on the high note of the Tensor platform.
Yeah, for sure. I actually think the most magical thing about Tensor is impossible to describe. You kind of have to experience it. And the good thing for all of you guys is that everything in Solana is so dirt cheap that it's probably going to cost you $10 to do it. So I would encourage anybody to just, you know, buy a couple Sol, create a wallet, and just go buy like a couple cheap NFTs. Specifically, if you want to get really cheap, you know, when you're on Tensor, go into the search bar and type in DRIP, so DRIP Season 2. And those NFTs, they're literally cheaper than $1. So you'll be able to buy like 10 or 20. And actually, I encourage you to go and buy 10 or 20 at the time. Because what you will see is when you drag that slider, and then it shows you like, hey, here's the 10 transactions I'm going to do. Are you happy? And when you press yes, you'll see the magic. You'll see how fast it is and how it feels like a centralized exchange. And until you do that, honestly, anything I tell you about Solana, anything I tell you about Tensor is just not going to click. That's the best way. So if you guys want to broaden your own experience, just going to try something new, I really encourage you to do that. But outside of that, I think the main things I already mentioned, for us right now, it's really like two things. It's leaning heavily into compressed NFTs and kind of building out for that future of, you know, hey, what would it look like if somebody was to issue 1 million assets, 1 billion assets? Like, how could Tensor support that? At the technical level, there's like an enormous amount of things that just completely breaks. For example, like if you have a gallery, how are you going to display 1 billion NFTs? Surely you're not going to show like 1 billion pictures next to each other. So, or how are you going to drag a slider that buys 1 billion? There's a lot of things that you need to think differently about. And so that's kind of what we're doing right now. And then the second thing is Tensorians. And for us, again, it's going to be part of the product. It's not going to be, and we're very clear about this, this is not a ref share NFT. You're not buying cash flows. You're buying membership to diehard fan club of Tensor. Like a good analogy is, you know, you walk into a Porsche dealership and you want to buy a car. You want to buy a Porsche. Like all of those cars are super fast, just as they are. And you can get one of them with like nothing else in it, and it'll be awesome. And that's kind of what Tensor is as a platform today. But then if you want to get a little bit extra, you know, you want that special leather, you want those rims, you want that paint, that's when you get a Tensorian. And it'll unlock a couple other features on the platform here and there that aren't going to make the product faster for you, because that would be unfair, but it will make it a little nicer to use. And so that's what we want Tensorian holders to look forward to.
I love it. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you're right. I think after this conversation, for sure, I owe it to myself to go on Solana and at least look at some stuff. But I think a lot of us have written off Solana. And whether that not be true, you know, obviously for good reason or not, you know, I think everyone deserves a second redemption. So for all of you out there listening, let's give Solana another shot. And you know, when we do it, let's check out Tensor. Let's make sure you know, we're using the #1 platform, and maybe we'll both see why it's the #1 platform. So I really appreciate our conversation today. Again, I kind of opened my eyes a little bit. I'll admit, during this down market, I've not really been looking much at anything. So this kind of gives me something to not only look at, but also not have to spend an arm and a leg on. So that's always good as well. So thanks again for having this conversation with us here at MVHQ. We really appreciate it and our partnership together. Want to make sure there's not anything else that you wanted to say before we head out. But
nope, that's it. Thanks a ton for having us.
Awesome. Everyone have a good night. Thank you for tuning in if you tuned in, and thank you for joining us if you're here live. So everyone have a great night, and thank you.